Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, July 12th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu coming to you from LA this morning.
And I'm Jill Wagner, holding it down in New York. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to from coast to coast. Jill, I will be here in LA for a couple days. I'm here at a podcasting conference hosted by Oxford Road, moderating a couple sessions, including on the Spotify campus, which should be pretty cool. And I'll have more on this tomorrow, but we'll learn new details on a civility score that this company called Seeker is trying to put out that will help basically put numbers against all the podcasts out there when it comes to, well, it's civility, right? So how civil they are, how fact-based they are, and it's a big thing for advertisers right now to try to get a sense of what's happening in the wild, wild west that is podcasting.
Well, whatever you want to say about the Mo News podcast, I think we're pretty civil.
I would hope whatever range they announce, we better be at the top of that range.
All right, let's get to some news here. Once-in-a-century flooding overwhelms the state of Vermont, and officials there are monitoring a dam that's nearing capacity. Military families speak out as a 5-month hold by one U.S. senator against all promotions takes a toll. We'll tell you what they're saying. Another day, another Supreme Court scandal, this one involving how justices hawk their books. We've got some Trump legal updates on his multiple courtroom battles. The popular diabetes and weight loss drug Ozempic under investigation for creating suicidal thoughts. Bank of America faces a major fine for illegal activity with customer accounts, some concerning revelations. And a new study out on what HGTV home renovations are doing to us. Moshe, some are saying it's making us all boring.
Do we have HGTV to blame for that, or did we start out pretty boring?
Or are we all pretty vanilla? And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, today is the day that disco died. We'll tell you about it.
All right, let's start with this catastrophic flooding in the northeastern part of the United States, where more than 2 million people across parts of New England have faced flood alerts this week. Now, you don't necessarily think of Vermont when it comes to flooding, but in this case, it's thanks to these intense rainstorms that are swamping the area and have caused rivers to overflow, destroying thousands of homes and businesses. In Vermont, the governor, Phil Scott, saying that the capital city, Montpelier, and many other communities across the state are quite literally underwater. There's water that's still as high as waist deep in certain areas. He says the devastation and flooding is historic and catastrophic. That capital city got a record 5.28 inches of rainfall on Monday. That's more than any day on record. Some areas in New York got more than 8 inches of rain within a 24-hour period. In Orange County, a 35-year-old woman died after being swept away by floodwater as she tried to evacuate her home.
Yeah, Jill, we were getting some really dramatic images from West Point and that area of New York over the weekend. But back to Vermont here, officials say this is worse than when Hurricane Irene hit back in 2011, which dropped 5 inches on the state capital, nearly double that. This go around, you have to go back almost 100 years to see flooding of this level. 7-day rainfall totals across much of the Northeast already at 300 to 500% above normal levels. They've seen more than 100 swift water rescues for people who were stranded. The issue here, as you mentioned, is just frankly too much rain too quickly. Vermont remains under a state of emergency. It's getting help from surrounding states. The main dam in Montpelier is inching towards the dam spillway. As of Tuesday afternoon, there was just 1 foot of storage capacity left. Now, it is starting to come down for now after peaking on Tuesday, but it comes as numerous rivers across Vermont have been rising amid the downpours. Again, some swelling higher than they did during the hurricane 12 years ago. Now, there's a sunny forecast today, but thunderstorms are possible tomorrow with a risk of excessive rain, and that could mean a couple more inches in Vermont, New Hampshire, eastern New York, all areas dealing with these record floods. Jill, just some heartbreaking images from these small towns across Vermont. It's an area that Alex and I know pretty well. We go up there to ski during the winters up in Stratton. So these towns of Ludlow, Londonderry, Okemo experiencing catastrophic damage. They haven't even been able to assess it at this point. And it is a big time for Vermont It's just a couple months. Fall foliage is a big tourism time as people go up there for maple syrup, apple picking, etc. And so our hopes are that they're able to recover pretty quickly up there.
And now to a story getting a lot of play on our Instagram account. For the first time in 164 years, the Marine Corps was without a Senate-confirmed leader, and all senior military promotions are on hold. This is thanks to one person, Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, who has continued his months-long blockade on Pentagon appointments as a way to protest military abortion access policies. So the Pentagon instituted a new policy in the fall that allows for paid leave and reimbursement costs for travel for service members who cross state lines to get an abortion. And it came after several states effectively banned the procedure, preventing service members on bases in those states from accessing it if needed. Tuberville believes that this violates the Hyde Amendment. That's a law which prohibits federal funds from paying for abortions. The Senate has not passed any military promotions or nominations since February because of Tuberville, who has refused to allow them to go forward via unanimous consent. In other words, the Senate batches nominations and typically approves them en masse. And it's a game of chicken at this point because Tuberville says he'll only lift the block if this policy is formalized in law or dropped. And the Senate doesn't want to go through with approving nominations individually, which could take months. The Department of Defense says Tuberville is blocking about 250 promotions, and they think the number could reach 650 general and flag officers by the end of the year. So the now former Marine Commandant, General David Berger, had his relinquishment of command ceremony. This ended his 4-year term, but he didn't formally hand over the position to a successor. His successor is General Eric Smith, and he can only take over as an acting commandant. And it's not a minor role here. The commandant oversees the Marine Corps as its highest ranking officer. It's a 4-star general and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, he's saying that smooth and timely transitions are central, quote, the full strength of the most powerful fighting force in history. A Defense Department spokesperson telling reporters that the hold is leaving a huge impact across the force. Some officers are being asked to delay their retirement, to assume higher duties without higher pay, or to force their families into logistical nightmares as they remain in relocation limbo.
Yeah, Jill, we'll get into that in a second here as we're hearing from hundreds of military families here on our Instagram account. A top Army officer was on Capitol Hill this week trying to pressure senators on both sides of the aisle to help break the blockade here, arguing that this is negatively impacting national security. General Arnold Rolling was up on the Hill saying Tuberville's actions are reprehensible, irresponsible, and dangerous. Tuberville, though, standing by, saying he's not hearing that it's hurting readiness at all, and believes that something has to change in order for him to give up this hold. That said, some of his Republican colleagues are skeptical of this move. Most of them are, actually, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who says he doesn't think the strategy here is the best way to go about affecting policy change at the Pentagon. But yet Mitch has not taken Tommy in the corner and told him to cut it out yet. What's notable here is that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer actually has the power to kill this and kill the idea of holds, kill this tradition that's been around for decades in the U.S. Senate. But all of the senators want to preserve this tradition of holds because Democrats make use of this as well. In fact, it was just a few years ago, Jill, that Senator Tammy Duckworth, a Democrat from Illinois, put 1,000 nominations on hold during the Trump administration to make sure a critic of Trump's was getting his deserved promotion, though her hold was only for 12 days, not nearly 6 months like we've seen in the Tuberville example here. Nevertheless, we heard from a number of people in the Mo.news community about how this is impacting them. It's not just the Marine Commandant and the top folks here. This is impacting people across the military spectrum. Here are a couple of responses. We posted a number of their messages on Instagram stories and as a permanent post, but I just wanted to read a couple for the people who listen to the podcast. The first from a spouse here. I think people not associated with the military don't realize how big a deal this is, she writes. Promotion in the military is different from the civilian world. I can only speak for officers because I don't know how the enlisted side works, but there is a predetermined track for promotions with guidelines for when someone is eligible for promotion based on the number of years they have been in their current rank. When you get promoted in that year range, that determines your assignment. The earlier you're promoted in that range, you're looked at more favorably for better jobs, locations. This is a big deal. And if a service member is under contract, they can't leave to get another job. They're literally stuck. Here's another note. An Air Force spouse of 15 years. My husband is coming up on a big promotion, and this blockade will literally throw his entire career off track, plus our entire lives, like knowing when and where we'll move. For families that have sacrificed so much, this is reprehensible. And here's one more. Senator Tuberville is messing with real people's lives, and I'm so angry about it. Our good friend isn't being promoted because of Tuberville, and his whole life is in limbo. Politicians who use the military as pawns here are awful. The sad thing is, our friend is a Christian chaplain who's also pro-life, so very morally aligned, probably, with the senator here, and yet he's messing up his and his whole family's life. It is so frustrating. Jill, the messages go on because ultimately, the promotion cycle is so key here. You move around to bases, and that's the case here. These military families who give up everything, and they're moved around by the military, and they show up in states where abortion may be legal, abortion may be illegal, and may be irrelevant to your lives. Either way, you're moved around, and depending on your promotion, that impacts what schools your kids get into. That impacts your housing situation. That impacts your income situation. There's a whole bunch of things that happen here, including the later you're promoted, you're not getting your new promotional pay. And there's no back pay here. So the more weeks or months they miss out on this, that's money they'll never see. Overwhelmingly, these families just frustrated. Even people who, again, are morally aligned with Tuberville on the issue of abortion feel like he's taking it out on these military families, and there's got to be another way for him to pursue these policy differences that he has with the Pentagon.
This is why I think the community that you and that we have created at Mo News is so special, because until I read the comments from some of these military families, I really didn't understand this issue and how it was affecting real people. It seemed to me like this political fight, and that it wouldn't have these real world implications per se, that, maybe it was just at the very, very top of the food chain, so to speak. But yeah, people's lives are now hanging in the balance. Somebody wrote about childcare, and I could totally relate to that because I struggle with childcare, and I'm not moving around the country because of my job. So just a big thank you to everybody who wrote in to really help explain this. And I actually don't remember another issue where we didn't get anybody on the other side. To a person, every single person felt like this was a terrible thing that Tuberville was doing.
That was the case among the promotions. We did get a note just before we record this podcast, Jill, from one woman, one military spouse, who says she does support what Tuberville is doing, though she admitted that her husband is not up for any promotions this cycle. Regardless here, you hear this from Republicans who even say, he might have a point on the Hyde Amendment, though, again, the DOD is not paying for abortions. They're reimbursing travel to other states. He considers that part of the paying for abortions, federal tax dollars going towards that. Either way, there's got to be a different way to deal with this. And again, there are ways around this, right? Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Democrats could kill the idea of holds forevermore, but they love to preserve Senate tradition, and they're not doing that. Another thing they could do, they got to wait for Tuberville to leave the Senate and then unanimous consent without him, like on a day he's on vacation or not available. That's a possibility here. That hasn't come up. And then they could try to do these individually, but they don't want to do that because they're trying to prove a point that they don't want Tuberville to be able to say, hey, you see, you can totally do it individually. Either way, Jill, unfortunately, politics is at play here. And if you get really cynical about this, Democrats see this as a winning issue for them as Republicans look really bad by holding this up. So there's the reality of this. There's the political cynicism of this. And like so many things that Washington does and screws up, regular people suffer in the end. And these military families, whether they were dealing with sequestration years ago, various budget cuts, every time, by the way, we talk about government shutdown and the debt ceiling, guess who gets impacted? Military families. They have uncertainty. So they just feel kicked around here. They give their lives to this country. And regardless of Tommy Tuberville's stance on abortion, they just feel like, why do we have to get the tail end of this? And why do, all these politicians are always like, we love the military, we love the military. And a lot of them are writing in being like, well, we don't really feel the love right now. And that's notwithstanding this issue, whether it's veterans health care, all the other things that happen here, the dirty water on the bases in Hawaii, no matter what, they feel like they get the raw end of the deal despite giving their lives to this country. And so we hear you, we appreciate you here. And thank you so much for writing in. And we very much appreciate your service, despite all the nonsense you got to deal with, especially out of Washington.
All right, time now for the speed read from the Associated Press. Don't expect the controversy surrounding ethics on the Supreme Court to go away anytime soon. Next up, Justice Sonia Sotomayor. An Associated Press investigation found that Justice Sotomayor's staff pushed colleges and a library to purchase copies of her book when she traveled there for speaking engagements. Her staff has often prodded public institutions that have hosted the justice to buy her memoir or children's books, works that have earned her at least $3.7 million since she joined the court in 2009. But this goes wider than Sotomayor. The AP reporting, based on more than 100 public records requests, detailed several ethical dilemmas related to several justices' regular travel to universities. Supreme Court staffers have been deeply involved in organizing speaking engagements intended to sell books. That is conduct prohibited for members of Congress and the executive branch, which are barred under ethics rules from using government resources, including staff, for personal financial gain.
Yet another issue here in Washington, Jill, where Congress has rules, the executive has rules, all lower federal courts have rules, and the Supreme Court, no rules. Justices have repeatedly accepted all expense-paid trips to teach at popular locations, including Hawaii, Iceland, Italy. Gigs that are light on classroom instruction with ample time carved out for justices' leisure activities. It's included the following justices, and it clearly runs the political spectrum here, Jill. You got Sotomayor, you got Kagan, you got Samuel Alito, you got Brett Kavanaugh, you got Neil Gorsuch. This is all part of the AP investigation here. After hearing a description of the story in Sotomayor's book sales here, including, by the way, Jill, she went to Michigan State University and they bought $100,000 worth of her books and passed them out to students. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, he's a top Democrat there on the Hill, who's in charge of legislation to reform ethics standards, told one reporter, this is yet another sign of why the Supreme Court needs a major cleanup. Jill, it's interesting. We've brought this up going back to the Clarence Thomas scandals, the Sam Alito stuff. I mean, there's been investigations throughout the spring here. They all touched on conservatives so far. This one, bipartisan. Now, again, you're comparing apples and oranges here based on how much money Clarence Thomas was taking in versus what Sotomayor is doing here. Either way, the Senate's been debating ethics reform for the Supreme Court because, again, they rule themselves. They create their own rules, and they have very few of them. So it'll be interesting here to see Republican reaction now that liberal justices are involved, because so far, Republicans on Capitol Hill have been very dismissive of the story so far in relation to Thomas and Alito. But as we know, Sotomayor is a liberal. So how will Republicans respond to this, and whether and will this latest story now bring enough energy to the fact that the Senate has the power to adopt a code of ethics that they can mandate on the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court refuses to mandate anything on itself right now.
Okay, on to some business news from CNBC. Bank of America, the nation's second largest bank, has been ordered to pay more than $100 million to customers for double charging insufficient fund fees, withholding reward bonuses, and opening accounts without customers' knowledge or permission. The bank is also on the hook for an additional $150 million in penalties for the same violations. So this all adds up to $250 million in fines for illegal activity. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, known as the CFPB, announced Tuesday that an investigation found that Bank of America harmed hundreds of thousands of customers across multiple product lines over a period of several years through this series of illegal practices. The CFPB director said in a news release that Bank of America's double dipping on fees, opening accounts without customer consent, and withholding rewards are, quote, illegal and undermine customer trust.
Jill, nearly 1 in 5 Americans bank with Bank of America. As you said, it's the second largest bank. Just to put things in perspective on this fine, Bank of America has $2.5 trillion in assets under its management. So the government here says that Bank of America targeted potential customers by offering special cash and point rewards. So one of the things the government brought up here is that Bank of America targeted potential customers by offering special cash and point rewards if they signed up for a certain credit card, which is a common signing bonus used by a lot of credit card companies. But then Bank of America illegally withheld those bonuses from tens of thousands of customers. Also, going back to 2012 here, Jill, Bank of America employees illegally applied for and enrolled consumers in credit cards without their knowledge or permission to reach sales-based incentive goals. It resulted in unjust fees and, of course, negative impacts to the customers' credit scores, who, again, had credit cards applied for them by employees. In response to one of the allegations here, Bank of America spokesperson says that the lender has voluntarily reduced overdraft fees and eliminated all non-sufficient fund fees. That happened last year. So that was one of the issues here. But again, some concerning practices over the course of the last decade. This announcement is the latest sign that the practices exposed by the Wells Fargo fake account scandal, you might remember that from a few years ago, were not confined to Wells Fargo. You might remember in that case back in 2016, Wells Fargo created 3.5 million fake accounts for consumers, and U.S. Bank apparently also engaged in this sort of behavior and paid a $37 million fine last year.
This was a big deal, Moshe, because people's credit histories were messed up.
Oh, absolutely. And part of this $250 million fine, many of those millions are going to go back to Bank of America customers who were impacted by this.
From Reuters, Ozempic is under review by European drug safety regulators after they received reports of suicidal thoughts linked to the popular diabetes and weight loss drug and another medicine in that same class. The European Medicines Agency, that's basically Europe's version of the FDA, said it's evaluating the safety risk for patients who take the drugs after learning that 3 people who took the medicines reported thoughts of self-harm or suicide. Suicidal behavior isn't listed as a side effect for Ozempic, and a related drug called Saxenda that is also subject to the review in the European Union.
Notably, Jill, as you mentioned, there's 3 cases here, but Europe tends to move quick. Even when they get anecdotal reports, you saw that with the COVID vaccine side effects. When they would receive a handful of reports, they would shut things down or freeze things to analyze it. Here in the US, you don't generally see that on a handful of cases. Novo Nordisk, that's the company that makes Ozempic, says that the company's studies of Ozempic and Saxenda, as well as continuing monitoring, have not shown a link to suicidal thinking or thoughts of self-harm here. Ozempic, Saxenda, and other drugs target a gut and brain hormone called GLP-1, and they have exploded in popularity after studies found that they can help people lose significant weight. Remember, they all started as diabetes drugs. They found the weight loss thing, and that has blown up in the past couple of years. Ozempic was initially approved for the diabetic treatment, and now for weight loss. It has a sister drug named Wegovy that is cleared for chronic weight management in people who are obese. Here in the US, the FDA says they're not commenting here on this situation. It has said that clinical trials for Wegovy didn't support an increased risk of suicidal thoughts or behavior. But we should note, if you take Wegovy, you might notice the drug label, the warning label. It includes a warning for suicidal behavior and ideation because of risks associated with other weight management drugs. So we'll monitor this case, especially. This had a lot of interest in the last day, given how many people are either taking Ozempic, considering Ozempic, or know people who are on Ozempic.
I can't decide if we're going to look back at this period of time and think, what were we doing? Or if this is just going to be kind of the norm that people take these kind of drugs to lose weight.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, there are already a lot of side effects that are known with Ozempic and these drugs, right? And some of them are pretty nasty. And some of the issues you face, too, have to do with the fact that once you get off of them, your weight gain starts again. So you're sort of, once you're on it, you're on it. But that's always the risk, Jill. It was used for experimental diet treatment. It's blown up now, but we don't have any long-term impact studies on this. So there are inherent risks in any drug you take, especially when you're taking an existing drug, which we know, has worked for diabetes purposes, but is very new when it comes to the weight loss regimen.
Okay, to politics now. From NBC News, a couple of Trump legal updates. Lawyers for former President Trump asked a federal judge this week to delay a criminal trial over Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents until after next year's presidential election. The federal judge currently overseeing it has scheduled that trial to start on August 14th. In a court filing late last month, prosecutors from special counsel Jack Smith's team had requested that the trial be delayed until December 11th so that they could get ready for it. And now you've got Trump saying, forget August, forget December. How about never? Or at least not until after the November election in November of 2024. In a federal court filing in Miami, attorneys for Trump and his co-defendant, personal aide Walt Nada, said that to begin a trial of this magnitude within 6 months of indictment is unreasonable, telling, and would result in a miscarriage of justice. The filing points out that Trump is running for president, an undertaking that, quote, requires a tremendous amount of time and energy, and that effort will continue until the election on November 5th. 2024.
So as you said, Jill, the judge says, let's do this in August. And everyone's like, well, that's crazy, given classified records, etc. That's never happening, Judge. And again, Jack Smith wants to start this in December, wants this done before the election. Trump, nope, after next November. Convenient timing, because his bet is that he'll either be president again or another Republican wins, which basically means that they would run the Justice Department and kill the case. So that's the backstory there. And as we've covered all these cases, a typical strategy from the Trump team is delay over time. So there is a hearing in this case on Tuesday. We'll see what happens there. Remember, this is the classified records case, 37 counts, mishandling of documents, lying, obstruction of justice over those 100 plus classified documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago. But that's not the only challenge for Trump right now. Down in Georgia, a grand jury was sworn in Atlanta. They will be considering whether criminal charges are appropriate for the former president and his Republican allies for their efforts to overturn his election loss in 2020 in Georgia. The Fulton County DA, Fani Willis, who happens to be a Democrat, by the way, has been investigating since shortly after Trump called the Secretary of State of Georgia, this was back in early 2021, and suggested that the top elections official, this is a Republican now that he called, could help him find 11,780 votes, just enough to beat Biden. Remember, that was Brad Raffensperger. He was a Republican. He was outraged by this, being like, I'm a Republican and this is out of line. So there's been an investigation now for 2.5 years. They actually sat 2 grand juries in Georgia yesterday. One of them will ultimately consider charges against Trump here. This comes after there was a separate special grand jury. The special grand jury issued a report earlier this year, which will now be weighed by a grand jury in Georgia. This again caps off the 2.5-year investigation. And that includes not only that phone call, but fake electors that the Trump team was trying to install there, other pressure tactics they tried to use in 2020 to try to overturn the election results. And the suggestion right now, Jill, is that an indictment in Georgia could happen sometime in August.
Moshe, a lot to keep track of. Shall we do a quick Trump legal status check? So beyond this Georgia case that you just mentioned, where we could see an indictment there as soon as next month, and the federal classified records indictment, which we started this segment on, what else do we have?
All right. So we have the federal indictment, right? Classified records. We have the potential Georgia indictment. Then there are 4 others here. There's the 34-count criminal indictment in New York. That's the falsified documents, hush money, Stormy Daniels case. That goes to trial in March. So he's got a state case in New York. He's got a federal case. He's got a potential Georgia case. Then he might have another federal case because that special counsel, Jack Smith, who already indicted him on classified documents, is also investigating whether any federal crimes were committed in regards to election interference in January 6th. So that's ongoing. That could be a separate federal indictment here. Then you have the New York civil investigation into the Trump Corporation. The trial there starts in October. This is not criminal, but civil. This has to do with the Trump Corporation lying to lenders and insurers by fraudulently overvaluing his assets by billions of dollars. So that could lead to major ramifications for his business in New York. So that's the civil thing in New York. And then on top of that, he's got another defamation suit from E. Jean Carroll. She's the columnist who's suing him again for additional defamation. She already won earlier this year with a New York jury who found him liable for sexually abusing her in a department store dressing room in the 90s. He then continued to criticize her. She's suing him for defamation again. So we're talking about 2 actual indictments, 2 more potential indictments, the civil investigation into his company, and then the defamation suit. And that's where we're at as of this July 12th.
All right, from the Washington Post, it's a story that all interior designers are talking about this week. A new study has revealed that HGTV is making people's homes boring and bland. The study of 17 homeowners, so this wasn't a massive study, but 17 homeowners who were doing renovations revealed that more and more they were focusing on the idea that anyone could be scrutinizing or judging your decorating choices. And that's leading to people decorating their homes by what's trendy, not what they actually want. Now, this is a small sample size, but it's resonating with many people, including myself. According to Annetta Grant, a professor of innovation and design at Bucknell University, when people consider how their own homes might fare under this kind of scrutiny, it can lead to an overwhelming sameness in aesthetics. Grant calls the idea that anyone could be scrutinizing or judging your decorating choices the market reflected gaze. She says homeowners are basically seeing everything that's wrong with their home and imagining that when people come into their home, that they're also criticizing and scrutinizing and judging it. And it really makes people feel quite uneasy about the decisions that they're making. And so they're always kind of fearful of getting it wrong. So they play it safe.
Jill, I don't see any shiplap or barn doors behind you right now.
White and gray, Moshe. I have fallen into this trap myself.
Many people in the comments when we posted this on Instagram were like, I feel pressure from Chip and Joanna Gaines to just, make it look like whatever they're putting on TV. The study here, Jill, finds that there's shift towards standardization. And right now, neutrals are what's trendy, what you were saying, whites and grays. And the goal is to create a place that is inoffensive and could appeal to many. Homeowners are constantly bombarded with data that attributes a dollar amount to relatively minor renovation decisions. All right, so now to some of this data. There's a recent analysis of paint colors by Zillow, which found that a white kitchen, which was the standard, could now hurt the price of a home by just over $600, whereas a charcoal gray kitchen apparently increases the cost of an average home by $2,500, hence the move towards gray here. Going back to the study here, Jill, most of the homeowners here express a desire to be, quote, that smart homeowner who has invested in my home and now on paper, my home is worth so much more, as opposed to just going with the colors that they want and going with the design that they want, because this whole idea here that's been created about creating value. And, what the analysts say here is, listen, if you're planning to sell your house, then go generic. But if you're going to live in this house, if you're taking out the 30-year mortgage and you intend to, live it out for those 30 years or for as long as possible, then do what your heart desires. Don't feel this pressure from the media.
Right. I was listening to an interview with one of the researchers here, and that was her exact. She said that people used to view their homes as their homes. It was where they lived and they were going to create their family or whatever else, and they planned on staying there for many years. And now, especially because home values have gone up so much, people really look at it as an investment. And that's why they are going with those neutrals and whatever else they're showing on HGTV. And Moshe, I totally fell victim to it. I've recently bought a house, and anything that I have done has been neutral. And that is not easy to maintain with two young kids.
After this story, I'm looking at your backdrop right now. Am I going to see like an orange or a purple, something bright and different? Or are we going to stick with the gray there in that room?
Well, Moshe, you're just going to have to wait and see.
Well, we'll let our listeners know. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see when or if she changes anything. All right, now time for On This Day, on this July 12th. We're going to begin in the 70s, Jill. On this day in 1979, it's the day that many say disco died. It was a baseball game between the Chicago White Sox and the Detroit Tigers at Comiskey Park. And as part of a promotion dubbed Disco Demolition Night, disco records were blown up in the middle of the baseball field. Fans subsequently rushed the field. Jill, it was considered an iconic moment here in the death of disco and the fall of the genre. And disco had such a quick rise and such a quick fall. In fact, the Grammys very quickly added a disco category. It would only be handed out 1 year, and then people turned on it and they killed it. It's worth watching. There's a Bee Gees documentary over on HBO Max where you can learn more about this. And there are many dates you could possibly declare the end of disco to, but many people like to point at July 12th, 79 as this iconic date. Okay, staying with the 70s here, Jill, we surveyed 100 Americans on the top 5 game shows in American history. Can you name one?
Is this a Family Feud story?
It is. Survey says number 1 on the board. So on this day in 1976, the game show Family Feud began airing on ABC, became hugely popular, and it has continued through multiple hosts. Now with Steve Harvey into the 21st century. A lot of fun. In fact, noticed this week that my old colleague and friend Gail King appeared with her family on Family Feud this week. It appeared to be a very fun episode. All right, moving to the 80s now. On this day in 1984, Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale, you might remember him, he got blown out by Reagan in 84, but he did put forward Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate on this date in 1984, making her the first woman ever to be successfully nominated as VP. Of course, we would see Ferraro. We would then see Sarah Palin in 08. And then finally, Kamala Harris in 2020, finally on a winning ticket. And now to some pop culture history. On this day in 1991, John Singleton's Boys in the Hood, that starred Cuba Gooding Jr., Ice Cube, Lawrence Fishburne, and others. It premiered in theaters on this day. It's an iconic film, Jill, that gave rise to what's called New Black Hollywood, recognizing systemic oppression and telling Black stories done by Black producers and directors. All right, finally, Jill, some music history here. If you recognize that tune, on this day 20 years ago, Beyonce's Crazy in Love reached #1 on the Billboard charts, featuring her then boyfriend, Jay-Z.
Was there a better summer hit than Crazy in Love?
So good, Jill. And actually, as I talk about this story, realized that over the weekend, saw some footage of Beyonce performing on her most recent tour with their daughter, Blue Ivy, dancing alongside her. I don't know if I feel old or that's exciting, but Beyonce's Crazy in Love 20 years ago on this day.
Okay, that is a wrap. We want to thank everybody for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
Those reviews matter, so if you could take a quick moment today to leave a 5-star review, of course. I mean, if you listen to the end, it's clearly 5 stars. And also write us a nice message over on Apple or Spotify. Greatly appreciated. Helps us continue to grow the pod. I hope everyone, Jill, is having a good Amazon Prime, Walmart Plus week so far. You have another day today of Amazon Prime. I think 2 more days of Walmart Plus, as you wrote in the newsletter, for all those who celebrate. I hope you're enjoying.
Yes. All right. Bye, everybody.